Hi, everyone. I'm Anne Gauthier, and I will be your host for today. And I'm very excited to welcome you all to the Carousel Property Expo. Throughout the week, we're looking forward to getting expert advice in property buying from the country's most notable key opinion leaders in real estate. Make sure to tune in and catch our other webinars happening in the next coming days. Although 2021 still proved to be a pandemic year, signs of recovery towards the year 2022 have given us more reasons to be hopeful, especially in real estate. So, what can we expect for 2021 and beyond for the property industry here in the Philippines? What emerging trends and new perspectives should we look out for when navigating our way through our property endeavors? Here with us to share a glimpse into the future of Philippine real estate is a seasoned industry leader with 25 years of experience in the real estate industry. He is considered the leading commercial real estate broker in the Philippines and has arranged the lease of more than 1 million square meters of office space and sold more than 2 billion US dollars in real estate. He co-founded LPC, a privately held professional real estate brokerage company, in 2016. We are very honored to have him here today. Please welcome the CEO of Lichu Property Consultants, Inc., Mr. David Lichu.
Thank you very much, Anne, for that kind introduction, for having me in your program.
Hi, David. Thank you very much for being here. How are you?
I am better now. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear. We are so excited to learn from you. I believe you have a presentation for us.
Yes.
Take it away.
Thank you. So I've been asked to give you a briefing about what's going on in the property market and how we see this going forward. And before I start, I'd like to share with you that I have been heavily criticized by people for being quite optimistic. I feel many times that we're the only organization in this storm of the COVID crisis that is saying anything positive and optimistic. So I just want to assure you that that optimism is grounded on a lot of data and facts. And we didn't just pull that out of thin air or out of somewhere else to be able to fake our way through the PR machines of modern media. This really is about the realities of what's going on despite COVID, and it shows you the resilience of the property market and why property is one of the best investments you can ever make in the Philippines. Next. So overall, we have office space still growing. So the demand for office space is still growing, and yes, the supply is moving faster because of the depressed demand. But you have to remember that the Philippine market is one of the few markets in the world where demand is still growing, whereas many other countries are in a negative territory. And the BPO sector continues to drive growth, and they continue to employ more and more Filipinos every day that passes. And the POGO sector, which has been a very big contributor to demand in the last 5 years, took a slowdown because of COVID and because of the tax disputes it has with the government. But a lot of that has been resolved. And I think they're going to come back in a big way starting towards the end of the year when people are allowed to travel again. And so, in addition to that, there's about 300,000 square meters, about 260 to 300,000 square meters of office space that want to get transacted within this year. That is demand that we see, that very few people see in the market. And that's, again, another validation of why we are not as depressed as many people. And the residential market got hit hard on the middle segment and below. Otherwise, the upper middle and above continue to do very well. And even though they're not the same as the pre-COVID levels, they are still doing well despite COVID. And in certain markets, property prices have gone up by as much as 3 times in the last 15 months. And then tourism. I'm a big believer of tourism because I think that's the one industry that we will eventually get right, and it will be bigger than any industry the Philippines has today. And so, and I think we'll do that in 10 years or less. So it will be bigger than the remittances, and the remittances today is about 30 billion. It will be bigger than the BPO sector, which today is about 30 billion. And I think we have a serious answer to what Thailand is offering to the world. And I will elaborate that as we go through the slides. Next. Before I talk about the future, let's look at the past. The last 20 years. This shows you the last 20 years and how this country has performed, measured by remittances, BPO jobs, cement consumption, tourism arrivals, the stock market, and per capita income. And you'll see that the per capita income has doubled in 20 years. And during these 20 years, we fixed a lot of problems despite all the issues we went through as a country, whether it's a landslide or a calamity or a man-made disaster or politics or the bad politics or kidnappings, terrorism activity, etc., etc., etc. So everything has been thrown at the Philippines in the last 20 years, in fact, in the last 45 years, and we still continue to grow. That's a fact. And more wealth has been generated in the Philippines in the last 20 years. And this is what allowed us to do so well despite COVID. Things are bad in the Philippines, but it could be much worse. And COVID crisis hit us at the best shape the economy's ever been. I mean, let's not take for granted that the credit ratings continue to be upgraded even through this administration. Despite what many people say about this administration, I think they've done very well in continuing the economic reforms necessary to improve the livelihood of Filipinos and to make this country better. And because of that credit rating, a lot of money came into the Philippines, either in form of debt or investment in the stock market or investment in the property market or industry in general or power generation, etc., etc., etc. And we think that the next 20 years will be even better despite COVID. And we will recover from this COVID crisis much faster than many people think. If you have been to Poblacion just before the second lockdown, if you were in Burgos Circle, if you were in many, many places where people gather, you would not think that people cared about COVID, that there was any COVID in the first place, and that people kept going out, despite the fact that we were hitting 10,000 cases a day. And that shows you how insane people have become, locked up in the house, and they just need to see their friends again, socialize, hug people, and be able to communicate as before. And that's why I think the rebound will be much better. That's happening before the second lockdown, without any vaccines, and with 10,000 cases a day. Can you just imagine what life will be like for all of us when the vaccines are meaningfully here, when cases come down, and we are less restricted when we move? I think the recovery will be much faster than what many people think. Next. And looking back, this last 20 years economic boom produced a fantastic consumption of real estate, big demand for real estate across all sectors. We built 50 business parks in the last 20 years, and we consumed every single one of them. There's no more space in Eastwood City, no more space in Ortigas or Makati, very little open space left for development in BGC. And that's just some examples all throughout the city. where we have built and built and built real estate of all types. And that is a testament to the boom that we've been through in the last 20 years. And it's not just happening in Manila. Next slide. It's happening all over the country. And why is this important? Because it improves the investment sentiment of foreigners and locals for the Philippines, in the Philippines. It makes us inspired to invest more in the Philippines. You and I take for granted that we can walk on the street on, most of the time, operational sidewalks, lighted streets, security at night, etc. Many places in the provinces don't have street lights, don't have sidewalks. You will not feel safe at night. And yet, these townships are changing all that. For the first time, many people are experiencing what the Manila life is like. And it's bringing elements of the first world into many of these communities. And that is uplifting the livelihood and the investment sentiment of people, both local and foreign. And what excites me the most is the overseas Filipinos. We have 11 million Filipinos abroad, and for the last 35 to 40 years, all they have been sending is the least amount of money they can send to the Philippines. The rest they are saving away from the Philippines, away from the government, away from their relatives who constantly do nothing but ask for money from them. But the time will come, and that day is soon, when they will start investing real money, sending real money, remitting real money into the Philippines. Because there are millions of successful Filipinos that have stashed away, saved a lot over many decades, and they have not deployed it. Because all over the world, things are so uncertain. But yet, here in the Philippines, we're one of the few countries in the world that continue to do well despite everything. And that time will come soon when they will invest meaningfully in the Philippines, these overseas Filipinos. You don't know the number of multimillionaires, dollar terms, that are all over the world, just waiting for things to come and improve. And when that time comes, they will invest big. They will invest. They will not open sari-sari stores. They will not open, a fleet of tricycles and FX to do business here. They will open real industries. They will bring in real money. They will connect real talent from all over the world to make things happen in the Philippines. That is so exciting. And they are the low-lying fruit, because who else to convince to invest in the Philippines if not the Filipinos? Next. Let's talk about office demand for a bit. So that yellow line that you see on the screen is the amount of take-up every quarter that has passed since COVID. And you see it drop to what it was at the bottom, at the trough, at the second quarter of 2020. And from 2020, it's gone up significantly. I have to stress that this is a growth rate. So despite that dip, the market continued to grow at a much slower pace. And every quarter that passed, more and more jobs and companies are being opened in the Philippines. And we have to thank two industries there. The Pogo industry, which had a very strong first quarter, 2020, but then it's been quiet for the last 5 quarters. And then the BPO industry, which I think will have a massive, massive comeback in the end of the year, because the BPO industry today will react to this crisis much more aggressively than any industry. As the world goes into crisis, and remember this, as the world goes into crisis, Western companies will be under more pressure to cut costs, and the only two areas where they can move cost while improving productivity would be the countries of India and Philippines. And they will do that sometime towards the year end, this year end, all the way through 2022, 2023, and beyond. As we have seen during the tech bubble in year 2000, as we have seen in the Argentinian crisis, Euro debt crisis in the mid 2000s, as we saw in the global financial crisis, etc. They moved jobs meaningfully to the Philippines to be able to cut costs and improve productivity. The Philippines has become a anti-crisis program for many companies. Prior to year 2000, nobody cared about the Philippines. We could have been washed over. God could have taken over the whole island, the whole spew of islands, washed us over, and nobody would really care. Today, the Philippines is home to thousands upon thousands of employees. We are a relevant participant in global corporations today. JP Morgan, the largest bank in the world, has their third biggest headcount in the Philippines, with about 17,000 people and growing. And what would JP Morgan be without the Philippines? Today, it becomes a relevant, meaningful part of organizations. Next. I will skip through these slides. Next. Oh, can we go back one more? And I mentioned earlier, why are we so optimistic? Because we see demand unlike anybody else. We can see the pipeline of how many people are asking for space, how many want to do a deal, meaningfully, seriously want to do deals. And there's quite a lot of them. Next. Next. A lot of people think that retail is dead, and yet it continues. If we look back last year, the BPO industry continued to grow, and we think it will keep doing so even more aggressively towards the year end, all the way through the next 5 years. And they penetrated through so many geographies in the Philippines, most notably in Iloilo. I have to congratulate the leaders who have made Iloilo what it is today, an effort that took 15, 20 years. And Iloilo has really transformed more than any other geography outside of Manila. Iloilo is the most transformed. With the cooperation of the local government, national government, and the Iloilo Economic Development Council and Mayor Treñas and the local businesses working hand in hand to build infrastructure, invest in real estate, invest in job creation activities. And today, Iloilo is one of the biggest success stories ever. And they are benefiting today because so many BPOs want to go to Iloilo since 2020 and 2019, to the point where Iloilo is the biggest recipient of BPO jobs in the Philippines outside of Manila. And I bet that should inspire so many other cities to do the same. And the biggest spillover from Iloilo would be Bacolod. And I think the next transformational site will be Bacolod. Next. The BPO industry is growing. This is just some examples of companies that have hit all-time highs in their revenues despite the global COVID crisis. It's a validation that as the world goes into crisis, companies tend to offshore and outsource. And these are the people who've benefited from that effort. And all these companies listed here have meaningful employees in the Philippines. Concentrix is the largest employer in the Philippines with close to 100,000 people today. And they continue to grow. Next. And it's all over the Philippines. Next. There's talk about a lot of supply in the market. I am not as concerned as many people because a lot of this space will be wiped out. Next. And case in point is that half of all this space is fragmented and do not influence the market. The other half is divided across 7 very distinct districts across 40 different landlords. The 40, sorry, the half of this slide, which is gray, is divided across 300 buildings. Next. Next. This orange line shows you the movement of supply every year. So this year, 2021, is the peak of supply. And every year after this, less and less space is going to enter the market. And that's why I am less concerned about a glut in office space, because the developers are cutting down on investing in office space. The purple line shows you how much is PEZA. And I'm saying that in the PEZA universe, I think as a PEZA landlord, you will have a heyday because there's more demand than there is supply for PEZA space. And it's just a matter of time when the economy opens up again, more jobs are going to come here, and they will all want to locate in PEZA zones. The tan line, starting at 400,000 square meters, dash line running through this page, shows you the demand in 2020. The green line, dash green line, at the top end of this page shows you the demand in 2019. So you can see that big gap between the demand in 2019, demand in 2020, and 2021, 2022, 2023 will be somewhere in the middle of this band. And that's the reason why I think all this space is going to be wiped out eventually. And it will be faster if the POGO sector gets activated, which I think it will happen towards the year end also. Next. I am not denying the amount of contractions that have happened throughout the city, but the contractions are a lot less than what people think. The exact number is 851,000 square meters. It's that detailed. And half of that contraction came from the POGO industry, and they have terminated more or less 25% of their entire footprint in the country. And like I said, I think they will come back in a big way towards the year end. And you can see that the yellow line shows you it peaked in the fourth quarter of 2020, and it's decelerating meaningfully all the way up to today. Next. And this just shows you the POGO sector, how they've terminated in the last 5 quarters. And the good news is that as they released space into the market, half of everything that they have let go is PEZA space, which is much needed in this very PEZA tight universe of Philippine office real estate. And the POGO sector, as I said, contracted by 20%, 25%, but they're going to make that up towards the year end. Next. And before I leave the POGO sector, I just want to say that with this new bill that will pass into law in a few weeks, could transform the Philippines to be the Macau of online gaming. And if that happens, it will transform the Philippines economically for the better. And I just hope we know what to do when all that money comes in. Let's go to residential. The residential space got hit hard, and a lot of people pulled back in investing. But this orange line shows you the number of units sold every quarter, all the way to the trough in 2020 third quarter. And since then, it's been picking up. New launches were culled again in the trough of 2020 second quarter. They launched new projects in the third quarter and then let the market absorb that over the last 2 quarters. And I think as the sales stabilize this quarter, 2021, you're going to see an uptick in new launches towards the year end. Next. I am sharing with you information across 484 buildings, 100 developers projects, and 250,000 units. So we are not talking about, a handful of buildings, or like, oh, I got this fantastic deal in Rockwell, etc., etc., etc. We are talking about the scale of the universe of real estate condominiums in Metro Manila, and different price points. There are 6 segments of price points here, and you can see that outside the middle, and below, everything from middle up is improving in sales volume. And that is a testament to a strong recovery. And you and I need to appreciate that. And this is despite COVID. Next. The blue line shows you rents, and rents have fallen in the condominium space all across the city, all across the country, because people stopped going to work, because the foreigners had to abandon their units because they couldn't fly back into the country. They got stuck elsewhere, but and rents kept falling. And these are some of the hardest hit locations in the Bay. You can see that it contracted by almost 30%. And yet the orange line, what does the orange line tell you? The orange line shows you prices of these units for sale. And predominantly, real estate prices have held. That means that value got preserved despite the fact that the economy contracted by almost 10% in year 2020. Please try to appreciate that. The economy contracted by almost 10% last year, the biggest crisis we've had in a very long time, and yet prices held where they are, and in some cases even appreciated. I mentioned earlier that there's certain markets in the Philippines that grew. Well, Ayala Alabang and many Alabang villages appreciated by 35% in the last 12, 15 months. Punta Fuego, Tali Beach, Maya Maya, Terrazas de Punta Fuego have appreciated by 300% in the last 15 months. And we're not talking about 10, 20 million peso transactions. We're talking about hundreds of millions of pesos with no debt and transactions done in a whim. And again, that shows you the testament of how deep the pockets are of people, how deep the savings rate has become here in the Philippines, and how it's being deployed in real estate. Next. And it's not just in Metro Manila. These are some projects in Laguna and Cavite, and you can see here the average growth rate of land values in some of these developments. And some of these projects were built 20 years ago and some just 3 years ago. And you can see that the appreciation has been meaningful. It's one of the best things you could ever own. Next. I think at Viacove would be the next big kicker, because everyone's consumed all the land that they can get hold of in the Batangas Bay, and that investment horizon is going to shift to Anvaya. Next. This shows you residential in black, residential prices in black, and the overseas remittances in red. There's nothing that influences residential market as the overseas remittances. So much so that if there's a dip in remittances, the next quarter you can see a dip in prices. Every time there's an uplift in remittances, there will be an uplift in prices. And so what does interest rates do? It's an influencer down the road, about 3 to 5 quarters down the road. What does the amount of debt released to the system do? Well, it's an influence to the market, but it is a 3 to 5 quarter impact, unlike the immediate impact generated by the remittances. Next. This is how property values have behaved in the last year, 15 months throughout the city, and lows and highs. Next. Tourism. Again, I'm a big believer of tourism. This slide shows you that for every click and eyeballs going into tourism, there's a direct correlation to tickets booked in the Philippines. So if people and foreigners click on what's happening in Bohol, what's happening in Boracay, what's happening in Puerto Princesa, there's an immediate and corresponding impact to bookings, hotel bookings. And yes, the lockdown had a dip, but you can see that there's a very strong recovery after. There's another dip in the lockdown, and we are expecting a recovery very soon. And a testament to that is how Amanpulo and Boracay and Balisin and all these other places have behaved. They really have done so well. Tagaytay Highlands, the people who manage that place are friends of mine, and they said they've never seen so many people the way they have in the last 12, 15 months. Next. We have to thank Secretary Romulo for heading the Department of Tourism. It's a thankless job, and it is not easy to manage 110 million very hard-headed Filipinos and over a territory of 7,100 islands. So she has done her best, and it has been good enough. It has been good enough, more than good enough, for managing through this crisis. And things would be worse if not for her efforts. Next. Supporting her are all these people who are living here, foreigners that are living here, that are promoting the Philippines to so many people. And these people are across so many different ethnic backgrounds, so many different countries, so many languages. And unlike myself, if I post a video in YouTube, I will have 80 views over a span of 6 months. These people will have tens of thousands of views within the first few hours of posting. They have millions of followers in Instagram and other social media platforms. They are credible promoters of the Philippines. We never had this before, never to the scale that we do today. And that's why as soon as the gates open, we see a strong recovery in tourism. Next slide. And this is just some of the other influencers that we talked about. So I guess in summary, we can appreciate all the damage this COVID crisis has done to all of us, economically, psychologically, physically. But we cannot despair because we cannot deny all the good things that's happening also around us. And we have to keep reminding ourselves that despite all this bad news, there are good things happening. And despite all the wreckage, there are many good people that are doing their best to make the lives of so many people better. And with that, thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, David, for sharing your insights on the data trends and new perspectives for the property industry in the Philippines. I've personally learned a lot. I think we all have learned a lot. I do have a few questions for you, if I may. Let me begin.
Of course.
You mentioned that sales has gone down, but rent has gone down, but sales has remained. What would you say to those who are investing their property for rent?
Yeah, I think you just have to tide out and hold, and because the expats and the local domestic tenants will come back. They will come back as soon as the airways are open again.
That's good to know. And what opportunities or emerging trends can property investors take advantage of in 2021?
I think we all have to use this chance to invest in townships. And what do I mean by that? I think it's easy to find land in the village of Makati CBD, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the village of BGC, in the village of Rockwell, but nothing beats investing inside Makati, inside Bonifacio, inside Rockwell. Nothing beats going into a subdivision where things are more secure, reasonable, civilized, where scammers are under check and under control, more or less, and that they have a harder time scamming people, and that you're able to attract good and credible buyers, good and credible tenants.
Thank you. And what is your outlook for REITs in the Philippine market? Do you see more REITs coming in? And for those who are not familiar with REITs, could you first define it for us?
So REITs, REITs, REIT stands for Real Estate Investment Trust. And what you just have to remember is that owning stocks in REIT is the most efficient way for people to own real estate. Okay, so there are two REITs right now, Ayala and Double Dragon, and four have announced REITs coming online in the next 6 months: Robinsons, MegaWorld, Vista Land, and Philinvest. And there are five more in the pipeline that haven't disclosed. What is a REIT? Ayala owns office space, for example, and all this office space generate rent. And what the government said is that if you put this in a publicly listed company and all it does is collect income, generate profits, and then you dividend 90% minimum of those profits, you will be exempt from corporate income tax. That's big. Because, for example, if you owned office space yourself and you maintained it, if you owned it, you pay tax. If you rent it and you generate income, you will be liable for income tax. And then when you dividend that to yourself, you will pay another tax. So all in all, your tax friction is pretty significant. In addition to looking for a tenant, in addition to looking for maintenance, people looking for repairs, doing all these repairs and satisfying the tenant for their demands.
Mm-hmm.
You do all away with that when you own REIT stocks. So you can say, instead of me buying and owning a unit on my own, I can just own the Ayala REIT. And instead of investing 10 million pesos in a condominium unit, I can just use the 10 million and put it in an Ayala REIT, and it will generate dividends for me every quarter. And it will be hassle-free. And it is tax-free. And anytime I need to sell it, I can sell it. Anytime I need to buy more, I can buy more instantaneously. Whereas if you wanted to sell a condominium unit, it'll take you a few days to a few months to sometimes years. And then there's this whole toing and froing of how much the negotiation is going to be in terms of buying and selling. And then you've got taxes, significant taxes to pay. Here, it's just you go in, you go out, you pay a tax of 1.5% round trip. And you don't have to think about employees, you don't have to think about tax payments, you don't have to think about tax reporting, etc. And the biggest impact of that is that it allows developers to raise money from the stock market and then pour it back into the economy and build more. And it's a very efficient way for them to generate cash for their projects. And it's a very efficient way for investors like you and me to own real estate.
Thank you very much. That's really good to know. And the last question we have is, what investment advice can we give to young professionals regarding real estate?
Okay, so I might sound a little judgy and ranting here, but I'll go ahead anyway. I just want to show you I'm not judging and I'm not ranting, but I think the biggest investment that people need to make, especially when they're young, is to invest in themselves. And so cut social media, learn more, and utilize the power of the internet to educate oneself. and then work harder, because this whole YOLO thing doesn't really work. Promise. And when you work hard and you save and you don't spend on stupid things, then you can invest in your investment portfolio. And I always say, don't just look at real estate. You have to, the fastest way to generate wealth is by using the opportunities in the stock market and in the property market. Okay? The most efficient way to generate wealth is in the stock market. But it's also a very dangerous place when you think you know what you're doing, or when you don't know what you're doing. And so you just have to learn how to swim through the current in the stock market, because it is worth all that trouble. And then the problem with investing in the stock market is that it's not sexy. If you're courting somebody, for example, you can't go to your girlfriend and say, hey, I have 10 million shares of Ayala that stock. And you can't keep fanning your shares paper to people, but in addition to the stocks, you show your prospect girlfriend or boyfriend, hey, I've got this condo, it's got a gorgeous view. And I think that pretty much seals the deal most of the time, There's only so much bragging rights you can have with stocks, and people get so emotionally connected to real estate. There's a very human element to real estate that you can't find in stocks. I think in stocks, the only two human elements there that are very primal is fear and greed. And in real estate, there's a whole sense of romance and romanticism attached to owning real estate.
Thank you very much. That's helpful advice for all our viewers. Thank you, David, for that in-depth presentation as well on the country's key real estate trends and perspectives for 2021 and beyond. We love your optimism. Now take a look at the next slide to see the key takeaways from this session. Thank you once again, David Lee Chu of Lee Chu Property Consultants, Inc. For more information on David, you can check out their website, www.leechu.com. And for social media, check out Lee Chu Property Consultants. Now, we're just getting started, everyone. Make sure to stay logged in right here at the Carousel Property Expo to see our upcoming webinars and exciting activities. Don't forget to check out Carousel Property, where you can find the widest selection of properties to choose from that will satisfy every person's needs and budget. Because in Carousel Property, there's every type of home for every type of person. I'm Anne Gauthier. It's been a pleasure being with you today. Stay safe, everyone, and see you at the next webinar.